Blackballed. Blackballed. Blackballed.
What is up, everybody? My name is James D. Fiore, and this is Blackballed. I've had a crazy month. The month was weird. I think I could talk about this now because, well, it's over. I was the co-chair of a candidate. So I can tell the story. I'm not going to say where, and I'm not going to name the person, mostly because he still owes me money. But I was the co-chair of a mayoral campaign in a fairly decent township, I guess you would say, whatever, in Ontario. And I learned a bunch of stuff about politics by working on that campaign. One is that you could be a day drinking imbecile who literally can't, fill out a form at a hotel in order to secure his room. Just imagine Rob Ford, but just not as intelligent, right? And this person that I was the co-chair for, he would ghost the campaign for like days on end, and we got in there late. And I swear to you, this story doesn't have a point. But we got hired really late, and like 6 months late. Like the guy who won the mayoral election in this town started 6 months before we did. So he threw this last minute team together. And to my credit, I got one smarter than me who ran an agency to really build a campaign machine for this guy. And then I wrote all of his policy, all of it. He thought policy was a bullet point. That was just improve public transit. That's what he thought policy was. And he was a counselor for 8 years. Nothing but the best in this country. We have a leadership deficit. Actually, we're bankrupt in the realm of leadership in this country. But so I wrote his policy. I crafted an image for him. I oversaw the rebrand of the logo for the campaign. And we turned a staunch conservative who had a reputation of being like a Ford-like conservative, and we softened him. We got him to support things like safe injection sites, and we got him to, come up with some sort of feasible solution for the homeless problem in this place. And it was going great. One time, a reporter asked me a question that was about city planning, and it was specific. It was about builders and the downtown and sprawl and all that kind of stuff. And I made a mistake and answered the wrong reporter the wrong question. So I sent a 200-word answer about safe injection sites to an urban planning question. And it became the top news item of that day about this candidate softening, and it was going great. And then all of a sudden, he went to a religious retreat without telling anyone. And when he came back, he said, "Yeah, I'm done. I'm done with you guys." It's a week before the election. I'm done with you guys. I'm gonna run on my own now. And keep in mind, he's a day drinker. He all he does is just jump from restaurant to restaurant, pretends to have meetings, and drink scotch and beer. That's what he does. And so he dumped his entire campaign staff a week before the election, and then finished an abysmal fourth. And he was doing fairly well under the circumstances of being a complete Neanderthal. He was doing fairly well up until that point. The reason why I'm telling you this is because sometimes in life, the universe, whatever the fuck that is, will deal you a hand that includes awful people. But sometimes the universe says, we'll give you an awesome person too. Caryma Sa'd joins us. Caryma.
That was a great intro. Thank you.
Thank you. I didn't know what I was going to do until I started talking.
You made the segue. It was like perfection.
Yeah, I would. You know why the story was so long? In my mind, I'm like, how am I going to segue out of this? I honestly was like, and then I was like, he's a horrible person. An awesome person is waiting backstage. Ding, ding, ding. Okay, now we go. And here we are. What does your shirt say? Because you always wear cool shirts.
This
Never
one
give
says
up.
"Never give up."
What is the photo or the picture?
It's John Cena delivering one of his wrestling moves.
Oh, I thought you were going to say a baby. It's like, okay. Never give up. John Cena. It's John Cena here. We need to deliver this baby. That'd be amazing. What a moonlighting position that would be. I invited you a couple hours ago to come on the podcast tonight. I had a guest cancel and I just was in the mood to have a dope conversation. So I went to your Twitter just to see what you were up to. And I want to start here because we both have history with this really trailblazing establishment in Toronto. Sorry, I've been out of Toronto for a long time, so now I pronounce the second T. I don't know. But the Hotbox Cafe in Kensington Market. Mm-hmm. I used to live on Spadina Circle, so I was like, a 2-minute walk away from the greatest coffee place ever on the corner of Augusta and Baldwin. I don't even know what it's called to this day, but I went there for like a decade, like every day. I was still going and picking up the daily newspaper, in like 2003, 2004. And my routine was to walk from Spadina Circle down to the cafe. On the way back, I'd go to the Smart Bank or whatever that variety store is called, and get my newspaper and then sit outside and read the newspaper and drink my coffee. And by the time the coffee was done, the anxiety just took over because I felt like a failure and I had no money. Somehow I always found money for the coffee and the paper, but otherwise I was completely broke all the time. But the Hotbox Cafe was a place where you could go and smoke weed, 15 years at least before it was legalized. It was just one of those things. And it happens in cities like Vancouver often. It doesn't really happen in Toronto that much, where something completely countercultural and technically illegal will just open up and people just leave it alone. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I don't know of many places like that in Toronto. Are you aware of any places like that other than
Well, right now there's a store on Queen Street that I believe is selling mushrooms.
So, can I please have the number of this establishment, Caryma?
I posted a tweet about it a while ago.
I might live in an area of the most highly concentrated, geographically, dispensaries on the reserve that also sell shrooms. There's 14 within a 20-minute drive from where I am right now.
That sounds ideal for you.
It does. And finally, that whole the universe provides is starting to make sense. I'm starting to understand and come around to that idea. But yeah, so I want to hear your history of the Hotbox Cafe, because you kind of made me feel a little bit nostalgic. You just sort of blurbed out a sentence and I was immediately transported back. So what was your vibe like with that place, and when did you start going there?
So I went there I think my first time there was 2015. And then I was like a near daily regular from 2016 to 2019. And it was kind of a period of flux for me in my life. When I started becoming a regular, I wasn't quite finished my articles, which for those who are fortunate to not be in the legal industry, it's a placement prior to becoming called as a lawyer. So that was like a hurdle that I still had to overcome in order to get my license. I wasn't even sure that I wanted to finish. I was in this existential crisis of sorts. But, I did. I pulled through. And basically, I launched my legal career from the Hotbox.
Really?
Spent time there kind of planning it out. And then it was my relaxation sort of spot. It's right around the corner from my office. So it was a community, right? Where there was a faction of people who showed up on a regular basis, like the employees, kind of a Cheers vibe where, everyone, each other. And also lots of visitors, tourists, so new people to meet with all the time. It's how I got involved really with the cannabis community, because up to that point, I smoked, but kind of kept to my own little pre-existing circles, and the hot box expanded that world in a huge way, and yeah, I really am gonna miss it a lot.
You know what's interesting about you? I just realized now when you're talking. Not that I thought you were the opposite of this before, but if someone were to hear you speak and then was like, "Where do you think her first office as a lawyer was?" I don't think any of those people would say an illegal weed cafe. Because and that's overstating the obvious. I always used to get pissed off when weed culture was always expressed like this, man. Like I just hated that. I thought it was a bastardization of what it really was like.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, there is that element, and a lawyer that launches from a weed cafe, no one is going to expect someone that is like you. If someone were to say, does Caryma own a marijuana dispensary or a science lab? I think a lot of people would go with science lab. Like you're professional. You don't speak in the vernacular that much. From what I'm told, you're stoned 24/7. You never seem like you are, right?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, but there's jokes in that and everything. But in all seriousness, I know more people like you, I think, than I do the bastardized burnout version of a pothead. I even met a Rastafarian once who told me something really interesting. He's like, "How much do you smoke a day?" And I've been the same for 25 years. I roll like a dime and a half at like 6 p.m. and then I smoke that at 3 different intervals until 11, and that's it. I don't. He's like, "That's the way you're supposed to smoke." He's like, a real Rastafarian will like ritualize smoking weed in a way that doesn't increase their tolerance level.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Rastas that walk around with the baby arm size joints, they just think that those guys are douchebags. Like
Mm-hmm.
And because I think that, similar to coffee, I think like marijuana does something and allows our perspective to shift in a way that isn't detrimental or dumb or slow, but actually kind of creative and non-linear, and maybe, a little bit, there might be a little bit of a benefit there. Mm-hmm. Do you have a thought on that?
Yeah. I think, I've been through the phase of kind of perpetually stoned, in a way that you don't even feel or enjoy it anymore, right? And that's not, I don't see any real value in that. So I can't say that I have rituals around cannabis, because I am a pretty sporadic person. And
are you sporadic because of cannabis?
No,
I'm kidding. Okay, I'm playing the after-school special role.
I think I'm more focused, actually. But to your point about kind of the stereotypical stoner versus reality, which is that a lot of people use cannabis and are productive, functional members of society, which doesn't necessarily mean kind of having a particular job or whatever. But just people who, connect with others, give back to the community, that kind of thing. That was like my experience at the Hot Box. And yeah, like respect for the plant to me also entails not overindulging or over consuming. So I think that there's truth to what you were told there. Yeah.
Just as a journalistic note, I have no idea if he was telling me the truth. It sounded like it made sense.
No, it's intuitive. Yeah, I like that. And whatever. It's subjective. What is true? We're in a post-truth to society. So.
Yeah, we totally are. There was a place on Bloor Street between Spadina and Bathurst on the south side of the street behind the Second Cup. From like 2003 to 2005, that was called Back Alley Callie's.
Mhm.
I don't know if you ever heard of this place. It was like straight out of a Tarantino movie or something. So you remember the alley where like the green room or the red room is? No, wait, the green room. You know where the green room is? And it's like an alley near Bloor, just south of Bloor, north of like Harvard kind of thing. Very close to Bloor. And there's an alley there, and it runs east-west like Bloor does between Spadina and Bathurst. And there was this fence there and a camera on it. And I don't remember who took me there first, but after the first time I got my membership card and I was allowed to go. And they buzz you in, and you walk in, and this was like the Hotbox Cafe existed, but this was like a totally different beast. It was like you sat at a table and they gave you a menu, and the menu had like 20, 30 different types of weed, 10 different types of hash, but then it had like LSD and mushrooms and MDMA and like everything. And like a guy like me, man, I was at Back Alley Callie's like fucking 3 times a week. Like I was just, you know what I mean? I was like, wait a second, I have access to anything. Wow, this is great. And I don't have to deal with that dealer with the rollerblades, that fucking heat score. Like, this is awesome. And I used to go there. I
must swear, I've never done most of those drugs.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying anyone should. Probably shouldn't have. But, I don't know. I've just been like, I've never been the guy that's like, who does like whoever had $100 a day blow habit, because first of all, my sinuses just would disappear. I'd literally look like Voldemort, right? Because my nose would go away. But I'd had stints. I was a binge guy, so I would like, oh, someone just gave me a lot of blow or shrooms or this or that. You don't want to go to bed with a baggie, and I would just make sure that like it was gone. And I had to like grow out of that. That was like one of the immature parts of me that I didn't really grow out of until like 3 years ago when I stopped drinking, because that was the gateway drug. It's not really weed. Harry Anslinger, that was who created that. Do you remember that? Harry Anslinger was the first drug czar, I think, of the United States, and said that weed caused black men to rape white women, stuff like that.
Yeah, he's a really interesting character because he, I don't know how much you know about him, but
I think I said everything I know.
Okay.
Pretty sure.
Prior to taking up the mantle of like anti-cannabis, he was in whatever government department was responsible for prohibition of alcohol. And so his initial career was, alcohol is so harmful compared to blah, 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 including cannabis. But when, whatever amendment it was, like when prohibition ended, basically, or was on the verge of ending, this guy...
Sad day for the mafia, by the way. It's still a holiday for them, I think. Prohibition ended.
Yeah, for sure. That was bread and butter. But when that came to an end, or was close to it, this bureaucrat who realized he was about to be obsolete needed to find another cause, and that cause became cannabis. So this was all like a guy
to justify his existence, kind of thing, or what was the?
Yeah, to justify his existence and like kind of continued role as a bureaucrat.
So was it ever tied into, because I remember hearing this when I was a kid, that it was tied into the textiles industry because hemp was so good and you could yield so much of it that big giant textile corporations were like, no, we need to tell our government friends to make it illegal so that they can't make textiles out of it. Was that an urban myth or whatever?
I've heard that as well. And I suspect that there's probably some truth to it because corporate lobbies are why we can't have nice things. To your other point, though,
and lawyers, except for you,
racism was a factor in it as well, and that was part of what Harry Anslinger latched onto in propagating his message. But Canada actually was earlier than the U.S. As far as making cannabis illegal, and it was the result of Mackenzie King doing an inquiry after riots in BC, and he stumbled upon the fact that opium dens were a thing, and he's like, whoa, we can't have, the white ladies partying with these guys. And so that was like the first anti-drug legislation. And then it sort of snowballed. And, you know, fast forward hundreds of thousands of lives and like billions of dollars. And it's now legal and we're good to go. Sort of.
I know you're not supposed to do this. I'm not very sophisticated when it comes to the law because obviously I'm not a lawyer. I am a high school graduate, college dropout. But so I don't normally want to contrast things that are kind of like stupid to contrast. But it's always kind of struck me as like weird that we put drug users in prisons for extended sentences. Mm-hmm. But if you sexually abuse a minor, you probably get like half the weight in the sentence. And I've never just understood this. And every time I try to talk to a lawyer about it, they say things like, look, I don't want it. Look, this conversation leads to mandatory minimums, and I just don't believe in mandatory minimums. And I'm just like, okay, why not? Why not just for a couple crimes? You know, they have mandatory minimum for murder conviction, right? Isn't it 25 years? And then you get a parole after? No?
Mandatory minimums are, like, in my view, unconstitutional, in the Supreme Court's view as well. But they do it sort of piecemeal, and it's a separate issue because a mandatory minimum affects the discretion of a judge to consider sort of the circumstances of the offense. But to, you know, why is that the case? The prison industrial complex is really, really, really big money. So I'm sorry to say that that's a component of it. And we also just have a tendency to put people who are inconvenient out of sight, out of mind. And that tends to overlap with marginalized communities, whether the basis of that marginalization is drug addiction or poverty or mental illness or combination thereof. But you know, what's on the books, like, you know, societally, is that beneficial? Like, no one rehabs in prison. No. And yet that's where we warehouse people in cages for offenses that sometimes end up not being offenses at all, like we see with cannabis. And it's on the backs of those individuals, many of whom were medical patients, that we have legalization. And, you know, the travesty with that is the way it rolled out in Canada gave a huge head start to people with capital. It basically unseated the unlicensed, unregulated black market, whatever you call it. And like, they failed, right? So people lost a lot of money on these cannabis stocks. The CEOs made bank, but
I hope Julian Fantino lost a lot of money. I really do. That was the kind of like ground floor investor guy that like, where I was like,
exactly.
Okay,
who made his career off of prohibition and then was first in line to cash in, right? And he's not the only one. There are lots of politicians, former law enforcement, who entered that space and, you know, were
Senator Linda Frum. I don't share her politics, but she's always been nice to me. We've been like acquaintances, I guess you'd say, in the digital realm for 5 years or something like that, like a here and there kind of like quick chat conversations. Mm-hmm. I bug her for interviews once a year, and she's like, "You know, we don't do interviews, James." And I'm like, "Tra la 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 la." I usually say something like that, but she wrote. I kind of laid into her once because she tweeted on the day that legalization happened. Quote, "It's a sad day for Canadian kids." But what she didn't say in that tweet is that she had to recuse herself from the actual vote when they were passing it or giving it royal assent in the Senate because she owns real estate that she rents out to a weed dispensary. And it's just like, it's a sad day for Canadian kids. My kids are going to Disney World thanks to the weed dispensary rent. Like, it's like, you know, I don't know. I guess some people have an ability to sort of see past the hypocrisy somehow and just call it business. I don't know. I don't really understand. Like, now that it's legal, I might as well profit, you know, fuck principles, you know? Did you, were you involved in weed advocacy before legalization?
Yeah, I got into it kind of, the subject started to interest me when I was in law school. And then the hot box was my gateway into that activism. So for 2
Anslinger
years,
was right. The Hot Box Cafe was your gateway.
so for 2 years prior to legalization, I was kind of, following along with the policy and where the law was developing and just talking to people to sort of understand. And that's like really, that was the meaningful part. So people's different relationships to cannabis, talked to a lot of people who used it for medical reasons. So like,
I know nobody out of the hundreds of people that I've known personally that smoke weed, not one of them was like, it's really for my glaucoma. No one's ever said that to me. I'm sure I know it happens, but is it the elderly that use it for that? Like maybe I should just educate myself.
It was a mix. No, it was a mix. People with chronic illnesses, sure, the elderly, people like military vets, for a variety of ailments, including PTSD. Being in like those activist spaces probably increased my likelihood of encountering people with that background, right? So it was a function of where I was talking to people. But then also like relationships with cannabis where it's like, I just enjoy it. Like it makes me feel better, like self-medicating or just recreational, right? Pure recreational. And yeah, like, so people's stories though, like, and encounters with the criminal justice system, that was also a point of interest.
Yeah, weed is funny like that. When legalization happened, there was a bunch of stuff that I was like livid about. One of them, actually, this is kind of an interesting story. I was in the room when the idea for the next leader of the Liberal Party, this was in 2011, when they got shellacked and they were left with like negative 20,000 seats. I can't remember, but it was just a handful of seats. It was like the worst loss in Liberal government history or something. And remember, they went through like leaders like Stéphane Dion and all that kind of stuff. So in 2011, they had the worst election ever. And I was sitting with Alfred Apps. Alfred he's a lawyer. He used to be the president of the Liberal Party of Canada. And he wanted to hire me to do on-the-spot interviews at the Liberal convention in January of 2012. And we're sitting there and we were talking about, a little bit about Justin Trudeau. Alfred Apps, and he turned out to be correct, was like, and this is late 2011. It was at 2013 that I think Trudeau was elected leader, and I think, and then in 2015 he became prime minister. But in 2011, I think we were at High Steakhouse. To be honest with you, some douchebag overpriced place like that. I wasn't paying. He goes, you know what I think we should do? And I'm like, what? He's like, we should just legalize marijuana. And I'm like, I'm down for that. Like, ever since I read the Cypress Hill CD cover when I was 14, I knew that the justice system was not on the side of marijuana, of weed. And so I was like, this is a great idea. And all of the executives at the Liberal Party hated it. So when I started, so my contract was now two things. It was on the spot interviews at the convention in like 4 or 5 months. But then I had to spend the last 4 or 5 months of 2011 like leaning on marijuana advocacy groups and convincing them to tell their members to email Liberal delegates to vote yes on the proposition at the convention for legalization. The last poll, which was like a month before that, said that 30% wanted it to be yes and 70% didn't want it. It seems almost impossible because that was only like 11 years ago or something like that. But that's the way it was. And you know what? I got to be honest with you. I didn't do a post-mortem of my work. I worked really hard. And then it turned out it was 78% yes and 22% no. I don't know how to like credit myself for that. There's probably a bunch of other stuff. Maybe I was a cog or something.
I'm going to start telling people that you legalize weed in Canada. So
yeah, if I had a PR guy right now is watching, he's being like, stop fucking diminishing your mystique. It's going to be great. But I don't know. I would love to say I had maybe I played a small role in that first domino of policy initiatives being passed in a convention. Like that exciting world.
Mm-hmm.
But I interviewed Justin Trudeau that weekend. It was January 2012, the convention, before the vote for legalization. And I had a half ounce of like really skunky indica in my lapel pocket. And it just smelled everywhere. And I kind of thought it was symbolic. I just kept doing it. But I asked him about legalization. And I should have brought the clip, but his answer was, I'm not sure it's the type of thing that we want to do as a society when we're trying to get people to drink less and smoke less. And it was basically that. And I was like, and Ezra Levant illegally like played the clip over and over and over and over again when he finally legalized it, right? Never gave me, not that, I don't know, fair use, I guess, but he never even like put, anyways, whatever. It's Ezra Levant. So the politics of weed, mm-hmm. when it was first suggested, was like basically the main ingredient in how the government rolled it out. Mm. The government stalled their rollout, not so it could be well prepared for a changing society, but because the economics of weed was becoming really political. Like how did all of these politicians get this ground floor access to investment opportunities for grow-ups? Mm-hmm. Like, and you know who does really good work on this is Jody Emery. Mm-hmm. She nails it. She has a list. It's like 63 sitting politicians or ex-police officers or police chiefs or mm-hmm. whatever that have all like profited from the ground floor. And then the industry itself loses like what did they lose? I don't even remember the number, but it was like 50 million or something. I can't remember what it was, but it was a stupid
ridiculous amounts of money for. Yeah. But it's also because like weed's not something that's conducive to mass production, even where they hire people who are good with the plant, have experience with the plant. It's just it's not that type of product. So giant green, like there was a disconnect between this capitalist idea of go big, expansion, get as much bang for our buck as possible, and what it actually takes to produce good flower. And then, obscene amounts of money wasted on like concerts and swag and marketing things, and just despite the restrictive rules around advertising, just a lot of money thrown into that didn't go, like it lined certain pockets, and then a lot of people got screwed. And still to this day, because of all the barriers to entry to the industry, and it's a portfolio that's under the umbrella of Health Canada, so it's approached from this perspective of restricting and just really stringent rules and regulations, when in fact it's more akin to something that could be produced in a farmer's market. So there's a balance somewhere between kind of products for safe consumption for people, and ensuring some kind of quality, right? Versus it needs to come from a factory and be wrapped in 10 layers of plastic.
Oh my God, the packaging is fucking ridiculous. Like you order like a half quarter and it's like you could fit a half ounce in that thing that canister thing that they give you. I don't know. Like it's almost like they decided to hire all the people to strategize the rollout, and all of those people, like not only have they never smoked pot, but they were allergic. Like those guys, so they have no idea how to market it. I don't know. It felt like they should have just grandfathered in the dispensaries that existed instead of being babies.
It's just like, and like the sort of that industry as it was quite diverse, right? When like the Bay Street, just it reflected the Bay Street demographic. And yeah, so it sucked. Like legalization was a setback in some ways. Obviously, there are successes too, so I don't mean to downplay that. But
what are the
like the
successes?
hot box became illegal.
What are the successes?
Well, I think, being able to smoke freely in public without the apprehension of being caught by, like, right? Like it's no longer illicit in that way. So for me, that's the biggest win, because like I personally that was
we can give mandatory minimums to people that smoke hash oil in public, though, because that's disgusting. I fucking hate hash oil. It's so gross. I once watched a guy. He did 100 hash oil BTs by going. So he never had a clean inhale of air for 100 hash oil BTs. Just witnessing it, I turned green and threw up. I was just like,
how did that work out for him?
I don't know. He was fine. I think he's dead now, to be honest with you. I think he died.
Not because of that, just other life.
A collective of bad decisions, probably. Yeah. But in any event, yeah. Like when
that's terrible.
Before weed was legal, there was something like 9 different possession charges, and now there's like 43.
Yeah, so that's another example of like I can't speak to those numbers because I'm not a numerical person, but even some of the penalties got harsher, and because certain kind of penalties were made, just a broader range of possibilities, it meant that if you were a permanent resident, for example, and got charged with one of those, you might lose your ability to be in Canada. So it had like these repercussions that were perhaps unintended. I don't know. But, created a different culture of strictness, right? It's still embedded in criminal law, where, it ought to be just straight regulatory offenses, if you ask me.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. And I'm not saying people should smoke joints and drive, although I do maintain that when I realized, like, I wasn't until like 32 or something when I was told about the difference between indica and sativa, and I haven't smoked indica ever since. Like, I'm just, you know what I mean, like wheelchair weed and shit. Like I it just made me lazy and stuff. But the way that marijuana was like rolled out, pardon the pun, and the way that how slow it was, all the new charges that like you can get charged with, the fact that I feel like I don't know, Sophia Loren with the like 5-inch filter on the government rolled joints, like, oh my god, like you can't even smoke it, just, and then it won't go, and like I'm sitting there with scissors and stuff, and then I just break the whole thing up into a pipe because I can't stand it. But they really, like, to me, like butchered the entire thing. Like they butchered it financially. They butchered it from a marketing standpoint. I remember this lawyer that I knew, Joe Villeneuve, gave me Conservative Party caucus documents, and you can like read the transcripts of these guys arguing with each other about, like, one side was like, well, we have to control, if we win the next election, and they did, and it's legal, we have to sell it like Premier Winwood in government stores so that our senior citizen religious base doesn't abandon us. That's all they cared about. It was like, okay.
Yeah, it's, I mean, on one level, like the cultural shift has been fairly rapid, where, the day of legalization, I was nervous about like rolling a joint in public, and now I wouldn't think twice about it. I
had more fun rolling joints in public when it was illegal. I don't think I've ever rolled a joint in public since it's been legal. It's like they took away the only dopamine that marijuana gives you.
In the comments, though, Saucy Sea Witch is correct. The indica sativa binary is a myth.
Oh, so it's placebo that's been making me feel not tired when I smoke. So what is the difference then? It's just nothing? It's just like...
No, I mean, like different strains will have like different sort of terpene content, like, and depending on your own like endocannabinoid system, it's going to connect with certain strains, like have certain effects. I am like not great at the science part of it, so that's the extent of my explanation. But give it a go. You might actually like some indicas. Some of the like a lot of the marketing still leans heavily into that, and it's also.
I'm not convinced. I'm not. I have to do my due diligence on this because either my brain is revealing that I don't know, gullible, and I can just change things with my mind, because I know that when I smoke sativa, I do not feel tired. But when I smoke indica, I feel tired. If you tell me now that I am like this, the power of suggestion is so stronger than me, that I've been doing this for 20 years, 10 years, or whatever it is. Really? Is that the case? I'm shocked at that. I have to look that up. I'm sorry, Saucy Sea Witch, but I need to get a second opinion.
We'll circle back. We'll circle back on this.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyways, the weed rollout, there's so many things that are wrong with it. Driving while high. That's what I wanted to say. I thought it was kind of hilarious the way that everyone was starting to operate, like from the police to government statements to like teachers, as if someone just invented the day that they legalized weed, smoking weed and driving. It's like no one had ever done it before. And all of a sudden, like, they're like, oh my God, we have to prepare for this avalanche of cases of people. I hate to break it to you, but like most people that I knew until they were like 25 at least were like, I don't think smoking weed and driving is really being impaired. I think for a lot of people, they thought that they were more focused. They thought, you know what I mean? And it's not like alcohol. I know a lot of people that don't drink and don't smoke weed. They always lump the two together just because you're inebriated. But I know you're a lawyer and you can't like be like, I think you should get high and drive. But like, what do you think of that issue? Because I thought it was interesting the way that kind of transpired too.
So, I mean, full disclosure, I don't drive a car. So
I don't either. I don't even have a license. Not only do I not have a man card, I was like, paint that shit pink, because I don't even want a fucking driver's license. I just don't.
I didn't know that. That's cool. We have that in common.
You know how much of the planet we've probably saved by not buying gas and staying at home because we can't get anywhere because we have no way of getting there? You know, like.
That's why I have a scooter. But yeah, okay. On the point of driving, I don't know that there has been a constitutional challenge at the Supreme Court level, but because like the way the rules were set up, it kind of creates this false equivalency to alcohol without accounting for people's tolerance or potential medical needs. So effectively, there are people who should never drive because they're like they would test consistently above the legal limit, but maybe just not high or affected or impaired rather. And then there's others who, you know, if they are a novice user, they may not reach that threshold but be impaired. And so like there are people as well who, and I'm thinking again about medical users, who are less safe to drive if they haven't taken their medication. So it none of that nuance is captured in the legislation. I think it is a travesty. And we'll see kind of how those cases make their way. Unfortunately, it's really expensive.
Well, they don't really know how to test accurately for being high and impaired or whatever, right? Like
they experimented with different tests. Like one that was common at the outset, like it wasn't reliable in cold weather, which is problematic in Canada, obviously. So it's that regime is just a cluster.
Do you still, because we all did this when we were young stoners, Do you still, if you're gonna go eat out like a restaurant that you really like, get high right before so that you can eat that meal in a munchies state of mind? Because I do.
Sometimes. Um, Sometimes, yes. For a buffet, 100%.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like also I like it after a meal too, kind of as the
Ah,
palate
yes.
cleanser, right? So it's just there's the
There's
world is
so many
like
ways you can
there's no wrong,
consume
yeah,
your
there's no
Mary
wrong
Jane.
options.
Yes.
Mix it up. That's what I'm saying when I'm like not ritualistic about it. I like to mix it up. So
I like the way they're approaching edibles. Like I get these things called the Edison Jolts, and they're like pellets, like lozenges, and they're really tiny, and it's like 10 milligrams for a little pellet. And I'll just take 3 or 4 of them and just like let them dissolve, and I'll be a happy man for like 5 hours.
I've never
I
taken a
don't.
pellet of weed.
Pardon me.
I've never had a pellet of weed.
It's great. Okay, I hated edibles for so long because they always seem so childish. I don't buy gummy bears. Why would I all of a sudden buy gummy
Why
bears?
don't you buy gummy bears?
Well, probably because I don't watch wrestling. I'm imagining it's something like that. I'm just kidding. See, knowing that you buy gummy bears now makes me obviously rethink the whole thing. Like maybe I should start buying gummy bears. But when I turned 16, I was like, I'm too old for gummy bears. So I'm not gonna like as a 30-something-year-old be like, you know what? I had a hankering for gummy bears and sour keys and jawbreakers and all that kind of shit.
I urge you to explore that side of yourself.
I don't like candy.
Okay, that's fine. You don't have to. It doesn't have to be candy. But edibles, I love. One of my favorite things is like, especially in the winter. Well, only in the winter. Like I'll make hot chocolate, but use infused chocolate as the base, and just like boil milk and then pour it into a cup, and then have my hot chocolate. And it is dope. I recommend it.
Yeah, there's like a lot of really good applications, eh? Like the food thing is endless. You just make weed butter, and then all of a sudden you can just make anything, and it's gonna like I'm kind of a ninja at the traditional chocolate chip cookies. I make it from scratch with my daughter, whose little hands does the final form of the cookie blob dough thing. And so they always come out perfect. I don't know how she does it, but she's got like these perfect little hands, and everything's so symmetrical. And all our cookies are perfectly shaped because of Lizzie's little hands. But one day, I made weed cookies because I made weed butter, and it was fantastic. Like it was great. But what I noticed about cookies versus these little pellets that I take is that these little pellets give me a consistent feeling when I take them. It's maybe like 30 or 40 milligrams, but I'm fine with that. That's fine. Sometimes you get a cookie and there could be like 100 milligrams in there. No one really fucking knows. You know what I mean? Like, especially if they're kind of mass produced.
And that brings us back to kind of, if we do have farmers markets, which are like my preferred, I like that stuff, right? I like that vibe. But there's no real quality assurance. So there's got to be a way to bridge this, right? And we're just like not there, and Health Canada isn't looking at it from that angle because that's not what their focus or role is.
Yeah, the ad rules are fucked. I went to a place in Barry's Bay called Bay Bud. It's where I get my lozenges, and I walked in and I was like, I do this podcast, and he was like the guy that I first approached to see if we could get like some sort of sponsor. And I was telling him, I was like, I don't even want, I don't want you to pay me anything. I want to like give you a couple product spots or mention you at the end or put a logo. I don't know, whatever the fuck. And then do a promotional code or something. And then we'll see if you get a return, and we'll see what happens, and we'll know our numbers, and maybe we can adjust. And then maybe you pay me something if it works out well. Uh-huh. And then I read the fucking rules that you have to go through in order to like literally, like I after a week of struggling to try to figure out how to do this, I finally came up with this commercial idea where I was like, Bay Bud in Barry's Bay, we sell something we can't name in this commercial. Bay Bud in Barry's Bay. Like that, I didn't know what else to do because it was like you could sell the hats and the shirts, and I was like, okay.
Yeah, it's a straitjacket, the rules of advertising, and there's the way it was campaigned as a progressive
Such
this is a
bullshit.
burden on the criminal justice system, which is true. But then, like, the stated objectives of the legislation are like protect children from harm.
Yeah.
Like
if you smoke a joint, like people don't. It is so absurd that if you smoke a joint, what is it, within 20 yards of a school or something like that, that like you could get it, like that's like a serious offense.
That might
it?
be a regulation, like specific to Ontario, and I'm not sure because I just smoke wherever I would smoke a cigarette.
Like some of these are buying it from the kids at that school. Like you have to be realistic about these things. Do you think that we should do like a Portugal model and just kind of decriminalize everything?
I think that the criminal justice system is too blunt an instrument to deal effectively with what is a health issue, right? So the use of drugs is tied to a lot of stigma. I don't think it's inherently bad. I think, in fact, it would be improved if, there was reliable, safe access. People weren't putting themselves in compromising positions, all that kind of stuff. I think that would largely improve society, and is, I believe in Portugal, like the revenue from that goes into addiction programs and like social programs. Mm-hmm. So it could be like a positive feedback loop. It's certainly better than our current course, which is just to pummel people who are unfortunate enough to be caught. And, there are drug users across social strata. So it's not exclusively a poor person thing. That's just who ends up being caught, prosecuted, and convicted more often. There's, a lot of drugs in upper echelons of society. Just, it's not so like that. Just based on that alone, we're doing the wrong approach.
How many lawyers do you know personally that have allergy issues?
I can't really, like, I am a bad.
I don't think I'm really seriously asking you that question.
Yeah, no, but I'm like, I can't tell when people are on drugs. I just take everyone at face value all the time.
You're projecting then, because I don't think that people can normally tell when you're on drugs, like when you're high.
Great.
Yeah.
That's how I
Except
like
for
it.
Right this second.
Only because you said to.
I know, I did.
James beat me to it.
No, you can't prove a thing. And since you're my lawyer, you have to stop talking about this right now. Right this second. I hope they decriminalize. Like, we need a whole society facelift. I'm really confused about something, actually. I've been thinking about this lately. There are two things that I can think of that they were kind of not invented, but that, a pile of examples of this thing existed, and then a pile existed over here. The one thing is classical music. It's like, it's the classic composers, and then like one or two guys that no one knows their names. It's like everything began and ended with, oh, you can't get better than Mozart. That's it. We're done. And the other thing is political systems. It's like, why are there only like 4 or whatever it is? Like, why, and why can't we rename our system to reflect the idea that capitalism and social programs intermingle to create an entity that isn't either of those things? Because I think we put ourselves in these boxes. Oh, you're a fucking communist. Oh, you're a fucking conservative, and it's like, we don't have to be any of these things. We can be this, like, strange milieu of a bunch of really reasonable political positions. It's a stoner question maybe, but I'm asking you, why do you think that we just sort of like plateaued? Forget the classical music thing, but when it comes to political systems, like, what was the last political system invented? Was it Marxism? It seems like we are terribly uncreative when it comes to how to run our own societies. Do you want to smoke another bowl before you answer this question, Caryma?
So I don't know when we've last invented a political system, but I think we are the way we are because there's a vested interest in preserving the status quo. And in Canada specifically, we have cliques, basically, right? That exist and have existed and are generational, and the system just self replicates. And I say that because, in the legal community, there are lots of multi generational lawyers. I think the same is true for journalism, the same is true for politics. And we also have wealth concentrated in a relatively small group of people, and it's their interests that we serve. So that's why, and we think about like voter apathy and the low turnouts in the recent municipal elections, the provincial election, even the federal election. So people sense, I think, that these levers that are supposed to provide some mechanism of accountability just aren't. And I don't know. It's all very bleak. I don't have an answer to any of this.
Yeah, no,
but I think that's why the way it is.
Yeah, there's a weird disconnect because, we have a complex society, with all these flaws, from where it came from, all these like starting points that are kind of nefarious and colonial and racist and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily believe, like, I don't think I'm not one of these people that's like, well, since it started with the British colonialists, we have to dismantle it all. I just think that that's unproductive. I think hundreds of thousands or millions of people will die because it's just like, that's a revolution. I don't want to live in a revolution. But if we can improve the system that we exist in, I think that's the smarter choice. I think because we got starting like 20 years ago and kind of incrementally until now, like slowly over time polarized. I think what it did is it created this very quiet group of middle people that didn't really like what they were seeing coming from either of these polarized sides. And they became the apathetic. But they were larger, and I think they're larger in numbers than the two sides that are polarized. I don't know if that's true now. I think that was true like 5 years ago. And I just find it interesting that we kind of like, the internet, and then to a greater extent social media, turned us into AI before AI existed. Like that's what it kind of feels like. The way that we react to things online, the way that our emotions and anger will just come out of nowhere because of a screen in front of us, the way we buy things, it's just, we don't really be like, man, I think our humanity is like leaving us, man. Like it's crazy. I do though. I do. Sorry about the stew accent or whatever that is. But, I guess disconnected. Like, I feel like we don't know how to be with each other or something anymore. Is it like, am I paranoid, man? Did I smoke the indica? What's going on? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it feels more polarized now than it has at any point in my recent memory, but I don't have that much to draw on. So is it just the world is more awful as you grow older and start to recognize that for what it is? Were things actually better before? I don't know. But I agree that kind of people in the middle.
Display. It's more on display now. Polarization is on display now.
Yeah.
And the what do they call that? Like the bay window, the shop window, like the main window that shows the bay shit, like when you're on Queen Street or whatever. And that's like Facebook and Twitter, and it's surfacial and just kind of two-dimensional, not real. But then the media decides that it's real. Like, do you remember when Marie Henein was was getting interviewed by Peter Mansbridge? And it was like after the Ghomeshi trial, and Mansbridge goes, now I'm going to read some tweets from just random people on Twitter. The first one, college girls 6969 or whatever it was, would like to know why you as a woman could betray other women by representing Jian Ghomeshi. And Marie, and I'm paraphrasing now, but Marie Henein would be like, first of all, why would you just like ask me a question from some rando on Twitter? It was something like that. And like, and even though I had spent like the previous 6 months falling desperately in love with this woman, at that moment I was like, that's it. She's everything now. Like she just, because I don't, and sorry, the point of that was that social media becomes like the, you know, the showroom or the front window at the bay. And, you know, it's not really worth, like the stuff in it isn't worth anything, and it's being monetized, but it's how we react. It's like Facebook became our nervous center, or Twitter became our nervous center.
The pandemic didn't help either, because then everyone was just terminally online. In fact, it was the only place to be to have interactions for some of us, right? So I feel like that fast tracked it, like our demise to some extent. And just, yeah, people consuming crap and spewing crap, and there's no filters or like sense. I'm picturing like Peter Manbridge basically doing like the reading mean tweets out loud, though, and that's really a funny thought.
well, he was providing a CBC virtue signal, right? Because, you know, there was a time like the Ghomeshi case was people are going to get mad because people get mad. The Ghomeshi case was so interesting. Like I felt like if you're going to law school now, it would be a great case, just as an example of like how the legal system works, how maybe for some reason, for some people, maybe how it doesn't work. But I actually think that it worked pretty well there. I think that if like 3 key witnesses all lie on the stand, it's probably a travesty of justice that you get convicted. Right? Like it just seems that way. But the way that ever since Me Too, the media has done this weird thing where for some issues, you don't have to prove any of the things that you say. You just have to say them. And when you say them, that's the optics protecting, you know, ritual or whatever. So that example would be the idea that you have to question a lawyer for doing their job because they, even though everyone's got a right to a lawyer, they didn't choose their politics over their occupation, so they're bad. And you know, the CBC would never run a story, for example, about how fucking absurd that is, just on its face. You know, I always thought that was weird when like, you know, there's a movie, I can't remember what it is, but someone has to represent an American traitor who betrayed their government, and they got harassed and bricks were thrown at them. It's just like, if you guys want fascism, I guess we could just hang the guy in the town.
Criminal defense work is like you're literally on the front lines protecting an individual from the mighty force of the state. You cannot get more progressive than that, regardless of what the allegations are, because your role is to hold the state to account, to prove beyond a reasonable doubt whatever those allegations are. So if the state can't do that job, then doesn't meet the threshold, right? Either police messed up, prosecution messed up, whatever. But that's like you are standing between this individual and the full weight and force of the state. So people need to think about that when there are unpopular litigants, and we have a lot of unpopular litigants right now. You know, if we're thinking about the convoy or the inquiry, there's a lot of unpopular people who, you know, we've seen do objectively bad stuff sometimes, but does it rise to the level of a criminal act? And the reason that we have such high standards for criminal act is because loss of liberty it's just a fundamental civil right? And, you know, that then it's possible as well to have a discussion about where our justice system isn't just at all. And there's people who get railroaded. And then you have, you know, premiers like in Ontario who gut legal aid and make it even harder to have a lawyer while simultaneously giving more money to the prosecution. So all of this is just a plug for defense lawyers who take way too much shit for what's actually a social service. I'm just gonna put that out there.
I talked to Reality Winner not too long ago, who spent like 5 years in prison for leaking classified documents, and she was talking about the for-profit prison system in the United States. I'm told that we have like a version of that here. Are you aware of what that is? Sorry, this is like a blind question. I don't know if you know the answer to this, but it just came to mind because, I was thinking while you were talking about, and earlier we were talking about recidivism and how it's like a revolving door. And I'm sure that has the reason why that revolving door isn't plugged because of the for-profit prison system. And then you find out that corporations are paying these inmates like $1 a day to like make furniture and shit. Which probably seems like a business people's answer to NAFTA, right? Because they don't want to send their shit overseas. And so it's a business. And then those judges in the States who got sentenced to like 30 years in prison for illegally sentencing kids to their for-profit prison buddies so they could get kickbacks. Like just monstrous shit like that. What's the Canadian situation like, if you happen to know? Like how are our prisons are run? Are there segments of our prison systems that are corporatized, or is it the whole thing? Like, how's that work?
So there's been an ushering in of private interests into jails and prisons. We're not quite at the level of what you've described, where it is an actual profitable cycle, as far as I'm aware. I don't know. I would imagine actually that there are analogous things where, there are jobs to be done and it's like outsourced and the wages are low, all of that. I don't have specific knowledge or examples. But, there was a report released today just on the disproportionate representation of Black and Indigenous people in the prison system. And, that's been the case forever, as far as I'm aware. And there's no real reason for us to have as big a prison population as we do. I'm of the view that only serious crimes should be charged. A lot of stuff clogs up the system that is just a waste. And I don't think our current system provides real opportunities for rehabilitation. Most people leave and come out worse than before. So like that's a failing, and we just keep pouring money into a system that's failing because it's profitable and there are a lot of jobs on the line. So it's, the system is vested in perpetuating itself as it is because there are people who profit from it.
Like, does it require political courage or political will to like draft legislation that says if you run a prison and that one of the inmates that is under your care gets raped or murdered in that prison, your prison's in trouble? Like if you can't stop,
it should absolutely be the case. It's like wild that, and it's really like we have prison.
Like, is that too idealistic? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
But I don't think so at all. In fact, the state has a duty of care that it routinely fails to meet. But good luck getting documentation. Good luck, getting a civil lawyer. Like it can happen, but it's the power balance is so skewed. And I don't know why there isn't that impetus. I would suspect it's in part because the public opinion, is quite regressive. And whether people like to admit it or not, there's a thirst for vengeance and punishment, and we shouldn't be indulging that, but we do.
I think the only people that have a right to vigilante justice are like parents of murdered kids, stuff like that. And I'm not even saying that it should be organized by the state. But I saw a clip once of this guy who was this perp who was being walked in an airport. It was like the 80s or something. And there was a guy on the phone. And as the detectives were walking sort of like behind this guy like that, the guy turned around and blew the guy who was caught, he blew his head off. Horrible. But it was the father of the kid that guy killed. So I'm fine with that. But it has to be that guy. It has to be like a parent. It can't just be some guy just vigilanting. You know, like
Uh,
I think if we like
mean,
inject our society with some gladiator traditions or something, I think we might be onto something. We need to create a political system, okay, for the first
I'm just
time in
waiting for
100
this to be
years.
clipped and then weapenized as like lawyer on show calls for
Can I
vigilante
get paid
justice.
for it? I really need the money.
Like the Canadian Anti-Hate Network is going to watch this fucking stream, and then we're radicalized out, James.
I talked to somebody the other night who told me on the podcast, I won't mention who it was, but who told me, oh shit, what did you just say before that? Sorry, now I'm starting to feel like the edible is kicking. But what?
That would be taken out of context and used as proof of our plans to radicalize society.
Yeah.
Anti-hate.
Tammy Roberts said something on the show that touched on that the other day, and I was just trying to figure out what it was because, I can't remember, but yeah, I probably shouldn't. I didn't watch that interview. Other people did, and they told me that it was interesting. I felt like I froze up. I don't know if you watched it, but I felt like I kind of froze up, and I didn't really. But I don't know because I don't watch any podcasts anymore. She had a very interesting way of discussing the topic that we were discussing. And I found it a little confusing. Anyways, I'm going to get off that. We're probably going to wrap now actually, because it's, we're an hour and 11 minutes in. It kind of went in a direction I wasn't expecting to go in. I didn't know we'd talk about weed for an hour. That was awesome. I love having something, even if it's like just a little morsel, in common with you regarding advocacy in that realm, even though I just did it for the money. You know what I mean? Like it's
that's dope. You got paid to do good work.
I got paid to literally not only that, I got paid to talk to the president of advocacy companies and totally using vernacular and slang because I was just being myself. And like yelling at them, look, if you want fucking weed, you gotta tell your members to fucking email. Like literally, that was my pitch, like 100 times to all these little groups. I had the time of my life. I thought it was great. I interviewed all these like people. Stefan Dion was like, "No, of course not. We should definitely not legalize marijuana." Whatever, however Stefan Dion sounds. I don't know what the fuck that accent was, but and then Paul Martin was like, "Oh, I think that studies need to happen." Like, it's just, they're so afraid to touch it. And then I go up to Michael Ignatieff, and he's just like, yeah, we should. And he was the one that just lost the election by like 1 million points. So everyone's just like, oh, there goes Iggy. It was a weird time. It was a really strange time, that the way it all kind of came together. And I got to tell you, I miss the dopamine rush of smoking something illegal and feeling a little bit like a rebel. Like I kind of miss that. Now it's like the fashionization of weed. Oh, fuck off. Like,
capitalism ruins everything. I think we can land on that conclusion, and it's accurate.
Yeah.
Prisons, cannabis, all of it.
Sex. Like, think about it. Like, it literally ruins everything. Like it yeah, I don't know. Homemade from scratch, whether it's cookies or sex. Caryma Sa'd, thank you very much for joining us. I appreciate it.
Bye.
We'll see you soon, okay? Bye. Just before we went on air, I confessed to Caryma that although normally I don't, at 7:30 I was like, I realized I wasn't doing a podcast. No, it was like 6:30. And so I did like 30 milligrams of edibles. And then I was like, I'm going to call Caryma and see what she's up to. And I was like, do you want to do the show? She's like, yeah. I'm like, okay. Caryma, would you mind smoking a bowl before the show so that you're stoned too? She's like, okay. So that was a conversation between two people that were quite high. And I think we did pretty fucking good. I think we stayed within the law. It was marijuana. It is legal. I laughed at my own jokes a little bit. I literally forgot what I was talking about in the middle of 3 separate sentences there and couldn't find my way back. Just kept going. I don't care how it looked. My big thanks to Caryma Sa'd. I appreciate you coming on the show today. And we have Jeffrey Perlman coming on the show tomorrow. Jeffrey Perlman is the author of The Last Folk Hero, The Life and Myth of Bo Jackson. It's a phenomenal book. And yeah, he's written 9 bestsellers. So he's mostly a sports biographer. His book Showtime was turned into that series about the Los Angeles Lakers. I think it's on Showtime. I could be wrong. Amazon maybe. Anyways, he's a really good author. So he'll be on tomorrow. And I think that's it for this week. I don't think I'm doing a show Friday, but we will see you next time. Hopefully on Blackballed.
Blackballed. Blackballed. Blackballed. Blackballed. Blackballed.